It's Sunday. That means it's time. I don't know, we're probably going to talk about some news and computers.
Well, that was random. Exceptional Radio.
Incidentally, I just checked my task manager and it's not showing me any of my drives.
Yeah, I feel like something's gone on with Microsoft lately, and they've done some, I don't know if it's neglect or if they're intentionally making their operating systems less efficient or something, but I definitely have noticed it on more than one computer. So it's not the hardware. It's definitely the software. And that's where I'm just trying to figure out like if it's NVIDIA or if it's Microsoft, because it could be both, as a matter of fact. But especially when they're trying to like slap AI on everything. It's like, I don't need a fucking AI assistant in my browser. I don't need an AI assistant on my desktop.
Oh, no. So when I did check disk activity, I did notice that Chrome was engaged in extremely high disk activity for undetermined reasons. It was like going into like a temp, one of those folders that is basically a string of machine code. I have no idea what goes into
the only
that
reason
shit.
I asked is because this one machine I've been gaming on has been functioning fine until about the last week, and then suddenly it's like I can barely use it, and it's like this is not that old of a machine, but it definitely felt like something. Sometimes you wake up and Microsoft will have pushed an update and you're like, fuck, I forgot I had automatic updates on. And it's just frustrating that this is, this continuous need to make sure things work is one of the reasons I get so frustrated with capitalism, I think. Like that's one of the main reasons. It's just things, they never work the way they're supposed to. And it would be way less difficult to complain about things and have a leg to stand on if shit was constantly working. And I feel like that's, I'm never, ever going to buy a Tesla, but I've been watching these reviews on the Cybertruck just to see what capitalism is doing. And it's funny to see what people are willing to deal with in the name of capitalism and then not really complain about it. Cause that's where I'm like, these people, they are putting hundreds of thousands of dollars towards this persona. And then because they're so invested in it, they can't really pull back where, if you don't go hard in the paint for capitalism, you can very easily point out its flaws and not be really a hypocrite. Because it's like, I think being born into a system doesn't make somebody a proponent of that thing by proxy. So it's like, this is the same reason I don't feel responsible for the United States military industrial complex. It's like, I didn't create these systems, and being stuck in them does not mean I'm a proponent of them. And I think that's where like people, there's a difference too, because then part of it is like when you complain without being able to do anything, but part of it is like also identifying, is this problem just me? Am I doing something wrong? Or is this a systematic problem? And that's where I'm like, hey man, check your fucking disk usage real quick. See if this is me. If this is me, because if it's just me, then it's one thing. But then if I just like randomly ask somebody like, hey, check your disk usage, and they're like, oh shit.
So
it's not even returning it at first.
So the offline system is not showing any abnormal activity at all. And the DAW is The only thing it's not doing is showing me disks in Task Manager, but otherwise everything is rock solid. I've had updates turned off for like the last, I don't know, however long they'll let you disable them. 120 days or something. So it's still on whatever that last one is. So it's running fairly smoothly, but I don't check disk activity unless I feel like things are running abnormally slow. And maybe I'm just used to SSDs now, and they're just.
That's the issue. This is an SSD.
Maybe your SSD. Oh, so I had an SSD fail on me recently. The third SSD that I've ever had fail in the last 14 years. Versus, dozens of platter drives failing over the course.
Which again, I've ran disk checks. There's no bad sectors.
Yeah,
I already did that.
Yeah.
And it's not the SSD, which again, it was fine a week ago. And it'd be different if we had an electrical storm or something where then the system is like, no, but there's been nothing like that. So that's why I'm like, increasingly, it becomes difficult to operate in systems where there's too many third-party interactions that then nobody can take responsibility if something goes wrong. And it's like, I do see the benefit of Apple closing off that part, but then you can't do things like play most of the games that other people are playing. So it's this weird,
So you've actually opened up an interesting folder of idea there. I've always thought that the Apple walled garden was a great idea because it ensured that the software that was available for the system would work 100% of the time. And I also agree that it sucks that only like a few select titles ever made it to the Apple microcosm. And it really is a microcosm. We're talking about like a single digit percentage of computer users. I'm not talking about mobile devices because mobile devices are their own thing for a little while until we get rid of whatever x86 architecture, our 40 something year old architecture. I think it's older than that, but that's not the point. The thing that I always found interesting about the complaint about the walled garden was there's like, yeah, but it doesn't do these things. But for the price of an Apple computer, like a normal one, not even a fancy one, and I realized the irony of saying not a fancy Apple computer. You can buy several gaming computers, like really high-powered gaming computers, and be just slaying demons and breathing fire and shooting lasers and flying spaceships like all day long. You can buy like 2 or 3 really well-spec'd gaming machines for the price of a medium-grade Apple computer. That's like a basic LAN party. That's like a dungeon raid group. And like not just like the machines, but like machines and monitors and keyboard and mice, peripherals, all that stuff. LEDs in the room. Apple computers are expensive. And then their entry level stuff like the laptops or the mini, the stuff that's, in the $1,000 range. People aren't buying that stuff to play games. They're doing it because they want to have.
No, they can't.
But they're buying that stuff because they want to be able to do use creative applications because they can't bring their workstation home with them, but they want to be able to keep working. At least that's the user that's projected by Apple. Somebody who's creating stuff, who's constantly on the go, but wants to be connected and needs their tools, but they're not doing all this other stuff. They're busy making, doing photography or creating graphic design or doing animation or making a movie, because lo and behold, you can run some of the best nonlinear editors on an iPad now, which is insane to me because some of this stuff, like when I run it on my workstation, it's like, man, this thing is a beefy piece of software. It does all sorts of crazy cool stuff. And lo and behold, a freaking iPad can run it. So the technology is great, obviously. And we're getting really close to this place where I think that the computers that we grew up with are, I mean, these things are, I mean, you only need them for AI now and machine learning and really heavy lifting. I looked at a laptop the other day, like a modern, like current, I think it's called Core Ultra processor. These things do incredible stuff. They're built with AI in mind. Like, this is stuff that I have to buy an accelerator card if I want my existing machines to adapt to this kind of technology. And it's packed into a chip instead of a giant ass PCIe card. I think that the biggest problem though is that, you know, Apple's got a monopoly on their app market that they curate, that they've cultivated, and it's because there are software companies that don't want to play ball. And I get that. Well, you know what? There's like 90% of the rest of the computer users out there, desktop computer users, laptop computer users who use Windows or Linux or some variation of Unix, who aren't using Apple's stuff, and they all need software too, and they want to spend their money on software too. Going after the Apple money is like, that's dangerous. Many of the software development team has like failed and then been disbanded because they couldn't meet the whatever compliance with Apple and their Xcode. And that's fine. Like, we don't get mad at Nintendo for saying, no, we don't want this game on our platform. We don't get mad at fucking... Actually, these people do get mad at Microsoft and Sony, but Sony and Microsoft...
Yeah, I was going to say they definitely do.
They definitely get mad about it, but Sony's games run flawlessly when they're really good, and then they port it to a PC, and it's like they don't give it enough attention because they're focused on their gaming console. They don't need to worry about what Microsoft Xbox does. They're worried about what Sony's PlayStation does. The same way that Nintendo is worried about what its... What's the Nintendo thing now? Switch? Is that what it is still? I think it is. Whatever the Nintendo is, they're not worried about the PlayStation's hardware. They're worried about how do they develop the hardware so that their games run at the level that meets the expectation that Nintendo has cultivated for the last like 40 years. It's just really absurd to me. Like, yeah, government, go in there and tell Apple how to like ruin their product. Jerks. And also let the market speak. If the market doesn't like the way that Apple behaves, Apple will respond to that. But I don't think the market needs like a government saying, "Oh yeah, that's a monopoly."
I mean, it definitely does.
I mean, it does, but I don't think it's the kind of monopoly that actually it's not a monopoly that's a threat to the broader software economy or software industry.
No, well, the issue is the government's job is to step in and point out those monopolies, but when they don't know the difference between an operating system and a phone, they're not equipped to do that. So I think that's where it's like, we don't want this government to do that because they're not capable, but inherently that's what they're meant to be doing, which is why we shouldn't have like 80-year-olds making the laws, unfortunately. And I think that's where it's like, there are all these things that,
oh man, I think
if we don't have someone controlling monopolies, then the monopolies run unchecked and then redefine themselves by being like, oh, we're not even, we don't have a monopoly over the phones, but we have a monopoly over the operating systems in this sector. And it's like, that caveat is not going to be understood by 99% of people in our government because they're just too old.
I wonder how many of our congressional representatives could get "Hello World" to print on their screen, like without help. No looking it up. They just got to go into Java and do it right now.
You remember when John McCain admitted that he didn't even know how to get on the internet? And it's like, I imagine that's closer than not. Like, we got the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Like, yeah, of course she knows how to get on the internet, but can she do a Hello World? I don't know.
I doubt it.
Yeah, I doubt it. She'd be the only one that I would imagine has any chance And I don't think she'd actually be able to do it. So that's where I'm like, no, you know, Joe Biden definitely is not. He wouldn't know what that even, where to even start. Like the idea of Joe Biden having a Twitter page is hilarious because then if you think about, obviously it's not him doing it, but the scenario where he's actually going on and like tweeting, if he was that hip, it would be actually amazing. But the fact that he's not anywhere near that is like, it's so dystopian that they try to portray that he is by having a Joe Biden fucking Twitter account that's constantly tweeting to make it seem like he's doing that. And it's like, I don't think The Rock is tweeting himself, but I can definitely imagine scenarios where he like is in his limo and something comes to him and he's like, oh, I got to tweet this right now. And he puts it out and he's just too like into his own ego not to tweet in that very moment because he probably knows how to actually send out a tweet. And it's like, I can't imagine 90% of our elected officials knowing even how, not even like, even the ones that are not 80 years old, the ones that are like 50s, I don't even know if they'd be able to do it. So it's not just about the
I was just trying to imagine a video tutorial about how to use Twitter hosted by The Rock. I think it would actually be amazing.
Are we sure that doesn't exist? Because he's done fucking everything under the sun at this point. Like,
now I gotta find out.
Like, remember when they were doing the GPS voices, and it's like they had the Samuel L. Jackson voice and the Snoop Dogg voice, and it's like, I'm sure there's some Instagram tutorial or some shit out there that The Rock did for fun with like Funny or Die, or like he's done so much shit at this point, like the fucking Scorpion King or like Star Trek Voyager. It's like,
oh man, he's got a whole bunch of videos about why he uses Twitter. He has a whole series of videos.
There you go. There you go. Because that's what he does. He does everything.
He does everything.
Can't fucking help it. Which again, that's what I'm like. Just knowing his track record, it's like, oh, if you can come up with it, he's probably done it. If you can like fathom it, The Rock has probably been there, done that, recorded it, and posted it to Twitter, Instagram. And it's like, at one point, Will Smith was that person, but now nobody wants to see Will Smith until, I don't know what it's going to take for Will Smith to get back into the public graces. But it's funny to see The Rock basically take up all the space that Will Smith used to take up in everybody's America's sweetheart like place. The Rock just absorbed it all, and nobody else came in to fill that space, which is also where
he's also the sponge.
Oh my God. I don't know. Yeah. It's like, there's certain things where I just look at them ethnographically where I don't know if the Cat Williams interview that basically was like the only thing that happened in the first 3 months of the year that wasn't war. I knew when it first happened that it was going to basically be like everything in 2024 is going to be a it's like a subtext to this original Cat Williams interview, because what's happening is Joe Rogan's audience is floundering in search of something else, and all these different outlets are grabbing up that attention that the Rogan audience can't retain, because ultimately every extreme thing that Rogan can say, he's said, and he can't go any more extreme except basically being a full-on Nazi at this point, because it's like, you can't be any more transphobic, you can't be any more misogynistic, you can't be any more like dog whistle homophobic than he's already been without basically coming out and being a full-on white nationalist. And he can't do that without losing his Spotify deal. So he'll never come out full white nationalist, but he's done everything short of that, and he can't do it anymore. So it's like, I think his audience is dwindling, but also looking for other shock radio or shock podcast, shock radio. They're looking to fill that gap, and Shannon Sharp is the only other comedy adjacent outlet that's really taking up space. Then you got the Breakfast Club bringing on a bunch of right-wing people, which is like, it's not really surprising. But there's a right-wing grift that is running out of steam, and you're seeing it happen with like Candace Owens now trying to swing back and make her audience Black people and try to be like, oh yeah, I've been saying Black Power stuff the whole time. And it's like, no, you haven't. We've been watching you. So seeing all these people try to realign themselves, I think we've hit post Joe Rogan peak. Like, it's not to say Joe Rogan's ever going to go away, but we're definitely past peak Joe Rogan. And I think all the people in that space have started to realize it and are scrambling to try to like. The funny thing is, there's a bunch of people who are riding his coattails, and all those people are trying to like scramble and get as much capital now as they can because they know the Joe Rogan winter is coming, and you won't be able to just be Joe Rogan adjacent, start a podcast and suddenly have an audience anymore, because those people are having to shut down their podcasts. And it's like, Cat Williams called it out, and the fact that he's explicitly called it out, excuse me, only to then have Joe Rogan bring him on and not have that interview do anywhere near the numbers that the Shannon Sharp interview did. It's like, I don't even know if people realize, they did. I know they talked about Cat Williams on Joe Rogan briefly, but it was in the context of him looking like an idiot, because when you have two people in the room who have no substance, it quickly devolves into like bullshitting each other. And then it became difficult for people to sort of rally around Cat Williams after he went on Rogan and said a bunch of idiotic shit and undermined any sort of credibility he had built with the Shannon Sharp interview. And that's where the machine of podcast content creation, and then the secondary and tertiary content creation that is the ad mill, it's starting to eat itself to the point that it basically was January when Kat did the Shannon Sharp interview, and by the end of February, he had gone on Joe Rogan, and that cycle had complete. It's not complete, but it's like we've had almost 3 months now of content that's secondary and tertiary content, all from that single interview, but it's because this entire space is literally just trying to milk the interview for every possible fucking clip that they can, to the point that they're still talking about it. And it's like, I think the last time we had something like this, it was the Will Smith slap, where people still reference it culturally and it's become a meme. But that first, it was like the only pop culture thing anybody would talk about, to the point that Will Smith's career seemed like it was never going to recover. And now he's going into sort of the attempt to recover mode. And it's not really working, but I think people have started to realize, like, they can't, when there's multiple wars happening, you can't really make it out. Even if you believe that Will Smith actually slapped Chris Rock, even though it was obviously fake, even if you believe it was real, you can't really be outraged about that while there's multiple wars happening and be taken seriously. So I think that's where people are kind of trying to joke about it now.
I'm trying to imagine the person's like, fuck Ukraine. Did you see what Will Smith did to Chris Rock? like, that's so absurd.
But that person was basically like the first year of the slap. That person was like, including people on the left, which is where I'm like, we all know Amy Schumer is a clown. We know she's a joke. But when she was actively trying to make it seem like Will Smith slapping Chris Rock was the worst thing that she had ever seen or experienced in her entire life, it's like, lady, we've unfortunately been subjected to your comedy, and we know that the shit that you talk about is way worse than this fake ass looking slap.
If that was the worst thing she ever saw, I question whether or not she actually attended school at any point in her life in America. Because I've seen way worse than that in public school.
Well, and not even just the worst violence, just the worst anything. She made it seem like it was the worst possible thing that anybody could ever do anywhere, and that she was traumatized. And like, making it about her obviously shows how narcissistic she is in the first place. But again, the way people then tried to keep perpetuating the notion that they were continuously traumatized by that event, it was a weird meme point in American it's like the left and the right came together to be dog whistle racist and be like, look, even the good ones do N-word shit. And it's like,
the good ones.
Yeah.
Even the good ones.
Yeah, that's what it felt like was happening from the sidelines. And then knowing that Chris Rock came back a year later and tried to do a whole comedy special about it, or with that being the main joke line or whatever. From the very beginning, I never thought it was a real slap. I always thought it was like, whether Chris Rock knew when it was coming, it was like, it felt like they both knew they were both in on the bit. And whether they improvised it or not, they're both long enough in the acting business to be able to go with something like that and improvise it on the spot, even if it wasn't pre-planned in the same way that like the Eminem, Howard Stern, Courage the Cowardly Dog shit was pre-planned. There's levels of pre-planning, and then there's levels of staging where we know reality television staged the events. They didn't write out the scripts, but they staged the things so it would encourage certain events to unfold. Like, especially you put a bunch of alcohol in a room with people who are volatile, shit's going to eventually unfold. You don't have to script it out. So we know that, especially
that's like that's fuck around and find out on on TV.
And it's like, well, everybody saw it. The cops were there. Why were no charges pressed? That's just my, like, there's an issue of, if something happens publicly, there are certain things where a person can be like, oh, I'm not pressing charges. But there's certain things where it's like, even if it wasn't the assault, they would have pressed charges for disturbing the peace if that was a real disturbance of the peace. So the public's peace was not disturbed. Will Smith was out partying later that night. I can only assume that the event was more staged or more fake than real. All the people who then continued to like lean into the reality or what they perceived as the reality of it, and then make it seem like that was the worst thing that they'd ever experienced. That's where I'm like, it felt as if it was some weird experiment in what would unite people in the name of racism. And it's like, oh, you take America's most darling Black actor for the last 40 years who hadn't done anything wrong, have him do something that's, it's still debatable whether you think it's wrong or not based on what was happening before. And it's like, nothing should ever be responded to that's verbally with violence. But at the same time, Chris Rock has a long history with Jada Pinkett of trying to get with her and being rejected. So that anger towards her wasn't innocuous, and him making fun of her wasn't out of nowhere. Like, he's tried to get with her multiple times before she hooked up with Will Smith and got rejected. So it's like, that history has to be taken into account, where I'm like, we're not just looking at an event unfolding that doesn't have some sort of history attached to it, that then makes it, if that was real and it was because Chris Rock had been habitually hitting on Jada Pinkett and then tried to clown her in front of in the entire world, how are people coming out on Chris Rock's side? That doesn't make any fucking sense. Like, this, if anything, in all of the fucking movies, in all of the goddamn rom-coms that we've been shown, this is supposed to have been the chivalrous moment that this man stands up for his wife, slaps the shit out of a dude that's mocking his wife in front of people who are laughing at his wife, and we're supposed to take Chris Rock, the bully side? This was literally a scene in The Nutty Professor where you have, oh my God, fucking Jada Pinkett, literally Jada Pinkett's, before I don't know if she's Jada Pinkett Smith, the comedian Dave Chappelle, fucking roasting Buddy Love, and then Buddy Love I forget, it was Clump at the time. Then the next time Buddy Love roasts him and takes the mic and comes back on stage. And it's like, if they were doing a callback to the Clumps or to the fucking Nutty Professor, and it was kind of like an abstract callback, it's still damn near.
I mean, that's a pretty obscure reference. at that point.
It's obscure
96, man. That's
if you lived under a rock in the 90s. Like, if we're talking about people who grew up with Will Smith, grew up with Chris Rock, they all also grew up with Eddie Murphy. So the Nutty Professor, and Dave Chappelle for that matter. So the Nutty Professor isn't obscure to those people. And so if they, and the fucking fact that goddamn Jada Pinkett was in it, like, if they were doing a callback to it that just completely fell flat because the audience of white people hadn't seen Nutty Professor, it's like, that's one thing. And then if that was the case, and then the audience is like, oh, what is this? Meanwhile, they're doing a bit that's literally, like, if you go back and look at Nutty Professor, I don't think Buddy Love slaps Dave Chappelle. He may even slap him. But it's definitely like humiliating the fucking comedian. So it's not, there's a lot of similarities to the Nutty Professor, between the Nutty Professor scene and what happened between Will Smith and Chris Rock. And that's where I'm like, it's enough that it's not tenuous. It's like, it may not be there, but there's enough similarity where if they came out and were like, yeah, we were actually doing a Nutty Professor bit, you'd be like, oh yeah, it's there. It's all there. But because now we realize, like, the audience, like, Amy Schumer probably never saw the Nutty Professor. So, like, the rest of the audience that were white people who weren't growing up watching, like, all of the Chris Rock stuff or all of the Will Smith stuff, they may have been familiar with these people through their mainstream blockbuster hits, but those people don't know Chris Rock and I'm gonna get you, sucker, or like, they don't know Will Smith in like 6 Degrees of Separation. And it's like the flat profile that they have of Black people is why it would be an obscure reference to that crowd, but it wouldn't be an obscure reference to like anybody who wasn't just observing Black culture from a distance in the 90s, because the Nutty Professor was a mainstream crossover hit. It wasn't just Black people that watched that, like white people watched that too. Oh, and that's where I'm like, not all white people watched it.
Oh, they get into a kung fu fight on the stage. I found the Buddy Love versus Reggie. It's like a total. It's almost like a blaxploitation kung fu fight, but way too silly.
Because Dave Chappelle's playing. He's playing like a characterization of a comedian.
Yeah.
So it's like, there's a reason the whole thing is over the top. That whole exchange.
He's got him in like a pinky joint lock, and he can't move. It does
escalate
so
to violence to the point where I'm like, if they were doing a callback to that, it's literally all there.
Yeah.
So
he tossed him inside a piano. See, I don't remember that fight scene at all. Like, I remember watching Nutty Professor, but I probably smoked way too much before. It's like a 6 minute long scene, and the last like 45 seconds is the fight scene.
Yeah, because part of it is like, in the first encounter, it's Sherman that's getting embarrassed. It's not Jada Pinkett's character. So that's where like the callback to that scene, if you know that scene is there, I mean, again, like, I can't imagine. You can't laugh at a G.I. Jane joke and not have seen the clumps or seen the Nutty Professor, because G.I. Jane and the Nutty Professor were happening at the same time. So if Chris Rock is making these dated ass fucking 90s movie jokes where it's like, if you don't need, if you
that was that
didn't
Demi
know,
Moore movie where they made her go
and
through
if you
boot
didn't know
camp.
Demi Moore shaved her fucking head for that movie, then it's not even really going to be a funny joke in the first place. I'm going to assume if somebody's going to know enough about G.I. Jane to know that that's why he's mocking the bald head, then I'm going to assume somewhere in that head is like Nutty Professor. And they may not get it at first, but somebody should have came out within a week and be like, oh, this is clearly a Nutty Professor homage. And it's like, it's too close for it not to have some sort of like, if that's a coincidence that somebody filmed that scene in a movie and it just so happened to the actress who filmed that scene in real life later, then we are living in a fucking simulation. I don't think we're living in a simulation, but if somebody does a movie scene and then like 20 years later that shit plays out in their real life and it's not constructed to reference the movie scene that person did earlier, that's some simulation level shit where I'm like, no, it doesn't. Those type of coincidences don't just happen in real life. Like, maybe one in a goddamn 100,000 trillion, whatever that number would be, like gazillion, whatever, after that many zeros is a one in that many chance of a person acting a role and then having that play out in their real life.
Yeah, that's like life imitating art, imitating life taken to an extreme. And when life imitates art, imitating life happens, it's supposed to be like, a very picturesque table setting or a landscape that happens to be really just, awe-inspiring, or fireworks, or an experience that is memorable. But life imitating art, imitating life, where someone gets like, where they're channeling a previous movie role, that's just weird.
It's impossible. It's fucking impossible is what it is. It's fucking impossible.
That's a setup.
Exactly. It's goddamn contrived. It's too constructed. It's physically, fucking numerically impossible, which is why, like, even more so now than ever, I'm like, oh, that definitely wasn't real. Like, it never looked real to me, but like remembering that literal fucking Jada Pinkett was in that goddamn scene, it's like, man, that was definitely some gullibility experiment to see what, or will Americans pretend they're gullible? Because part of it is like, oh, and maybe everybody's winking at each other. Oh yeah, we think Will Smith slapped Chris Rock, so now we can call him any sort of N-word we want. Wink, wink. Hey, look at him. He's the uncivil. He's the savage. He's the one he can't control his temper.
Well, obviously, it was all an act.
If I call him out, yeah. I mean, but it's like if that person pretends they don't think it was an act, then that gives them the license to say all of the things that they want to say about the perceived uncivilized version of Will Smith. And that's where I'm like, to me, it feels like that was kind of what was happening. It's like, oh, you give them millions of dollars and they'll act like this even. That's where it felt like the people who were coming out and were like rich white people who were supposed to be stars saying some like, I can't believe this happened. It felt like they just got the license to say anything negative about Black people. but like dog whistle it into saying it about Will Smith as if he then became the representative of all the black people because we thought he was a good one. How could he made us think he was a good one and then he goes and does this?
Man, they must have some really good cocaine in Hollywood again. I'm convinced that's where the crazy shit comes from. They've got good drugs again. That's really what it is. Like why it doesn't make any sense. I mean, none of it actually, like why does Hollywood, why would they even need to do this? I don't know. Who thought it was a good idea? That's the part that I want to know. Like, who thought any of this would have been a good idea? And why did they let it go on?
Well, and
I think that's like where it ends up for me is that like it doesn't make any sense. Why would I mean I guess it makes more sense knowing that Chris Rock has a thing for Jada Pinkett, but like what were they smoking when they came up with this idea? Like, yeah, this is gonna be great.
I think that nobody was watching. Nobody even fucking saw it live. People were acting like they were watching that shit. Nobody saw that shit live. You know what I mean? That's why they did it, because nobody was watching. Or that to me seems like the most obvious and logical answer. It's like the amount of traction that got, and people will then be watching perpetually for the next probably decade just
to see the next Oscar slap.
Right, to see if it might happen. And they don't care who's presenting or, will somebody slap somebody this time? And that now they have that audience, which wasn't watching before. I think it was like 6 million people were watching live.
It wasn't enough of reality television. They have to inject some other bullshit.
16. It was 16 million, which is like, that's less than fucking 10% of America. Not even 10% of America was watching. So like in 2021, 10.4 million. So their viewership went up.
Hey, just under 17 million people watched the Grammys this last time around. It's the same crowd.
Well, I don't remember what year this slap was in. So I'm trying to figure out.
That was in 22.
22, yeah. It was 22. Yeah, so they got a bump of 2 million viewers between 2022 and 2023.
Huh.
And then another almost 2 million bump in 2024. So it's like it went up.
You're talking
been
about
on
the
a
Oscars,
positive,
right?
Yeah.
Because those numbers are almost the same for the Grammys.
That's funny.
Yeah, no, I'm serious.
Fake, right?
Yeah, it
feels fake.
How the hell? Why are they so close?
So
it's got to be the same crowd that's watching this shit.
So on that note, there's a lot of fake people and fake audience members, and industries are becoming lazier and lazier about trying to hide these people. Do you remember when the baby's career fell apart because he said some homophobic shit?
Vaguely.
So he's trying to basically come back, and if you go look at his videos, the sock puppets are just not even being hidden anymore. It's like if you go click on a person who's made a positive comment, it's most likely a sock puppet, and it's so they've put so little effort into hiding the fact that it's a sock puppet that it's like, oh shit, this is obviously a sock puppet, because it'll be like an account that's number one the baby fan, and they have like no videos that they've liked on their account, and they have no content that they've uploaded, but the only thing that that account has ever done is made a comment on the baby's video. And it's like, I can only imagine how many of these fake audience members the industries have been creating before. But as you like point out, like, oh, 19.5 million people. Who the fuck are these people actually watching it? I've never met a person in my life. I'm sure they exist somewhere, but out of like 100 people, I can't imagine 20 of them are really interested in sitting down and watching the entire Oscars or the entire Grammys in a way where I'm like, if they, okay, a Beyonce or somebody that's part of the Bayhive, I can imagine them watching to get to Beyonce's category and seeing if she wins, and if she wins or not, determining whether they turn it off or continue watching. I can see that for a lot of people, but for somebody who's not in one of those industries to sit down and devote an entire evening to that, when there's actually effectively an infinite amount of content that you can access in any other direction, it's like, it's really hard to fathom that, yeah, 19.5 million, even less than 10%. I'm still having a hard time fathoming that many people sitting down to watch these things. So it feels constructed and contrived in a way that it just doesn't feel real anymore. Whereas in the 90s, I don't know if we had enough access to information to be able to discern what was real, because it's like we had the tabloids, and the tabloids were like obviously fake. But when you have Justin Timberlake and Britney Spears relationship in the mainstream, and that shit is obviously fake, it's like, what those lines being blurred made it more and more difficult to know, to the point where then you get the J-Lo and Ben Affleck relationship the first time, and it's like, was that constructed? We don't know. It felt like it, but it also felt like another means of trying to get people's attention and also not having to pay for a full movie production.
Yeah, man.
It's like,
it seemed like her like marriage to Mark Anthony was like legit, but then they got divorced really quick, and then next thing you know, she's like off to Hollywood.
but did it seem legit because they made a song together? Is that why it seemed legit?
No, it seemed legit because there were like pictures of them, like acting like normal people.
I mean,
I thought that was, I mean, maybe that could easily have been constructed, obviously, but
yeah. Well, especially when you find out that like anywhere she was going, they would like call ahead and have it cleared out. So there was nowhere Jennifer Lopez was going without her publicist clearing the place out first. And there was no candid appearances. That just didn't happen because it was all constructed. So that's where I'm like, if the pictures are what did it, those definitely not only could have been constructed, were more than likely constructed, because those were like the photo ops were one of her biggest products at the time. Because that's where I'm like looking at it. It's like if you can control your public appearances to the point that going out with your supposed romantic partner is going to generate so many images that then you have to clear the license for them to use your image because you're big enough that you can sue them and that you can demand an image clearance, that it's like,
whoa, they have twins together.
Oh, wow. But it's like that.
Oh, wow.
that's the, you know, so that makes it like that industry made it so that we never found out about their twins until today.
Yeah.
That's the first
Dude,
time
their twins are 15.
I didn't even know she even had kids.
Yeah, their twins are 15.
Like, I assume she may have had kids, but did you ever see her a pregnancy?
No, she just disappeared for a while.
Yeah, so this is where I'm saying, like, they've controlled her image to the point where it's like, if you can then start generating money from just showing up in public, because not only do you not show up, people won't even know you're fucking pregnant because you're not in public that frequently. So it's like this weird, she's everywhere, but also nowhere, in a way that it's too controlled not to be constructed, to the point where it's like, yeah, we're just now finding out her and Mark Anthony had twins together because their identity or the.
Okay, so I just pulled up, like, you know, the Google search of Jennifer Lopez and Mark Anthony. And out of all of these pictures, a significant number of them are from events and engagements where they're dressed to the nines. But there's one image of him where he looks like he's the singer for a 90s alternative rock band. And it's like my new favorite picture of him because he looks raw and like he's, you know, doing something. Not posing for a hey, look at my good side. It's like in the moment you can see that he's like sweating. Sorry, that was pretty random. But otherwise, every other image, no, not every, half of the images are completely posed and composed. And then the rest are littered with pictures of them and their kids, or a split of them and her with Batfleck.
That's so wild because, yeah, they managed to keep that.
It's impressive, actually.
Well, and what's crazy is like all of the articles about it are from 2023.
Yeah.
So it's like they basically kept it under wraps until last year, is what it seems like.
He used his ties to the Latin music mafia to suppress all relevant information about his children until they were teenagers.
See Jennifer Lopez's rare video of twins in 2023. Rare footage of her and her twins for their 15th birthdays.
Yeah. The Rare Pics collection. Good for them for keeping their kids out of the public eye.
Yeah, for sure. But that's also, I'm like,
bravo. But also, like, how did they do that? That's impressive as fuck.
But also, our suspicions have been confirmed because in this article, she's like, why am I never happy? Like, yeah, you never look happy. You never fucking look happy. Even when they're smiling in their pictures. It's like, I've never seen more wealthy people who look more upset to be alive. Like, that's the craziest shit that, again, like, I don't read a lot of Jennifer Lopez articles, but just seeing this and one of the first thing being like, why am I never happy?
It's because she won't let herself have that second cup of yogurt in the morning. Because she has to use non-fat creamer in her coffee. She's become part of the machine. And
well, ironically, Will Smith was saying a lot of that stuff before he fell out of the public graces. It was like he was trying to get people to understand that he had a lot of money and a lot of fame, but because of what you're saying, it wasn't like he wasn't actually living life in a way that would make it seem like those things had even affected it. And it's like, you don't have to get rich and famous to live like that, because then the rich and famous people still don't even end up living like that because of the perceived need to always be in a certain line of pretending that they've been there before, and in the process not actually doing the things that people think rich people do. And I think it was like his YouTube page or something where he was publishing these videos and people were like, oh, what's he about to start advertising? And then I think he eventually came out with like a workout app or some shit, like a wellness app or something. And it's like, it was definitely building up to promote something. But I also think that like when people who are supposed to be the bastions of capitalism and the ones that you're supposed to be chasing and aspiring to be, when they start saying like, oh, you don't need all this money and wealth, it's like then they tend to fall out of favor or be pushed out of favor. And that's where I'm like, Dana White slapped his actual wife and not slapped somebody in defense of his wife. And he's had actual like no repercussions for doing that. So I can't imagine the same people who are not condemning Dana White and not holding Dana White accountable also being upset about Will Smith and continuing to try to like drag Will Smith into this place to make it seem like he was doing something inhumane or evil by that slap. And it's like Dana White's not the only person who's done like physical violence in the public eye and not gotten any repercussions as like a famous person. But I feel like he's the most egregious in recent times, in that there's like a full-on video of it. So there's no question of whether he did it or not. But the fact that it just came and went and then nothing happened, and then people are treating this guy like he didn't do that shit like last year. It wasn't 10 years ago. It was just last year. Just last fucking New Year's. So that's not that long ago to pretend somebody is a recovered domestic abuser. Because that's what he is. He's just a rich domestic abuser. He didn't go to jail for it. So the public, I guess, just doesn't care. I don't know. But I can't take anybody seriously when those two things exist. Like when they're concerned about one and not the other, like is usually going to be concerned about the Will Smith and not concerned about the Dana White. Because I haven't really met anybody who's like, Dana White shouldn't, like, it's, if somebody's against like violence, they're usually against violence, period. So it's like there's not really any justifying Will Smith's actions. It's a matter of like, you don't have to justify them to understand them, but then you also don't have to condemn them. And that's like a lot of people have gone beyond simply not trying to justify and then gone into condemnation to the point where I'm like, it just wasn't, I don't think it was enough to warrant that type of reaction in the form of that level of condemnation. But if they're going to do that, they also can't just not do anything when Dana White slaps his fucking wife and gets caught on video doing it. Come on. That, I don't know. It's, I don't really expect Americans to be consistent, but that type of inconsistency is just like what are we doing? What are we doing here?
And I just pulled up this list on Ranker of celebrities charged with domestic abuse, and it's like,
it's a lot.
It's endless.
It's not a small amount. Knowing it feels like there's a lot of celebrities, but there's really not. It's probably less than 5,000 celebrities if we're talking about actual A-listers.
Yeah.
And then it starts getting like, if you start then restricting it to individual industries, like, oh, A-level actors, then the list gets real short. Or A-level tennis players, then the list gets real short.
Yeah.
And it's like the only reason there's thousands of famous people is because it's aggregate of all the things that people can be famous for. It's like, I can only imagine a layperson being able to name maybe 5 active race car drivers at any given moment. They may be able to name some past ones, potentially, but that's where it's like, nobody really gets famous for racing anymore unless they're getting famous because they're black.
Or they die.
Right, yeah. But that's what I'm saying, active. That's why I said active.
Yeah. You got to die in racing to make it into the history books, apparently. No, that's not true. Some people made it into the history books without dying. But no one remembers their names. You have to or you have to survive some horrible accident and come back. Then they get remembered. That's really rare. That's like a Hendricks level race car driver. That's so rare because most of them probably killed themselves driving before they ever achieved greatness. So there's a list of people accused of sexual harassment post Harvey Weinstein, and it's a pretty fucked up list. This list has people like Joe Biden and what's his name, Brett Kavanaugh and Kevin Spacey, and who else? Matt Lauer, Chris Hardwick, Morgan Freeman's on this list. Louis C.K., George H.W. Bush, Steven Seagal, Dustin Hoffman, George Takei, Charlie Rose, Gene Simmons, Tom Brokaw, John Travolta, Mark Cuban, James Franco. Well, that should have been like the top of the list. Jeremy Piven, Al Franken, Oliver Stone, Sylvester Stallone, Russell Simmons, Danny Masterson. He just got convicted. Stan Lee is on this list. Geraldo Rivera. Ryan Seacrest. Man. This is a fucking crazy list. Dan Harmon. Nelly. I haven't thought about Nelly in years. Michael Doug. Man, this is just depressing now. The page keeps loading more.
Well, at the same time, I know some of them that came out were like just dropped
Yeah.
almost immediately.
Yeah.
Because one was like the one I remember the most was the Jamie Foxx one, because it was like kind of absurd, where you're like, when you hear the details, you're like, this sounds made up. And I think there came a point where it like there were like meme accusations, and it was like you never knew until it was settled whether it was a real one or a meme accusation.
Yeah.
Because like the Nelly one too.
I know that George Takei's was just like dropped immediately and just forgotten about.
Because then there was like one against Usher, and that one was a meme. Like the person who was doing it was like not mentally well. But the crazy shit was the one with Usher. Even though she wasn't mentally well, there was like enough circumstantial evidence, like him going in the same building as her, where it's like if you just looked at a couple of pieces of information and be like, oh shit, maybe he is guilty. But it's like, then upon further investigation, it was because it was like an external camera. They consulted people who worked at the hotel and were like, oh no, no, he never went in there or whatever. And it was like, if you only got one piece of information, it's going to look a certain way, which is also where I'm like, the accusation list is probably way longer than the list of people who were found to have been actually like accused in a court of law.
Yeah, no charges filed.
Like,
they weren't indicted. None of that happened. That's probably just the internet being the internet and letting people put whatever they want into a list. Which is like the big problem with the internet, is that there's very little curation of information. The vast majority of it is noise. Noise that looks like, a car or a boat or some other kind of advertisement.
Well, and I don't feel like that's what Google intended.
Yeah. Yeah, guys, we're going to create all the noise on the internet. It's going to drive everyone insane, and then we're going to sell their data. I don't think that's what they set out to do at all. But somehow that's where they landed. That's just like sad for me to think about, actually, that in the last 40 years, throughout every technological advancement, the thing that seems to be dominating the available information that we have is noise. A global communication system, and the best thing they could come up with is selling stuff. Sometimes I wonder if it's like if it really is the culture of hobbies has just dwindled into nothing because it costs too much to have hobbies now.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that same thing too.
Like if I want to start magnet fishing, like the most affordable stuff on Amazon is probably gonna break, and then the whole like pay twice or buy cheap pay twice thing kind of comes into play. But like a magnet fishing kit, $15, 500 pounds pulling force. But then, of course, on Amazon, bombarded with all these other options. For only $5 more, I can get an extra 260 pounds of pulling force and a heavier rope. Next thing you know, I'm looking at stuff that's $46, $54, $80. All I want to do is go have the opportunity to pull some random piece of metal out of a creek. It's probably not even worth anything. That's like, can't even go do that like for fun because it costs at least $20, $15. Oh, no, that's not true. I can buy a magnet, just the magnet for 10, and I might be able to find some rope. That'll probably break because it's old and it's been sitting out in the sun, or it's gotten wet and dried too many times. I'm not complaining. I can afford to go buy a magnet if I want to, but it's more that, like, in addition to that, you got to go someplace where there is an opportunity to find something. So you got to find a creek with a road, but not one that's too busy, because it's got to be like have low enough traffic that someone might think it's a good idea to, dump something in the middle of the night. So now you got to think like a miscreant and think like, oh yeah, where's the dumping sites at? Go to the dumping site and pray you find something really cool, but probably not. It's probably just a rusty piece of can or a bike.
I've been watching those videos. Like a lot of times it's like you're saying, cans or
fish hooks,
railroad spikes.
Railroad spikes. What the heck's that doing in the body of water there? There's no railroad around here. And then when they do find something really interesting, like a firearm or a bomb, then like all hell breaks loose because the police show up, and then local authorities have to bring in some like federal investigator because it's a bomb. It might be tied to something. Nope, it's just some really old pipe bomb that some idiot made a long time ago, and it didn't blow up, and they didn't know what to do with it, so they put it in some water. But even then, gotta drive to a place. That's a whole day activity. Like, I mean, maybe some people live close enough to a dumping creek or a pond with a bridge over that people do that kind of crap to. But I'm pretty sure that most people who are going to get this idea are like me and then be like, oh shit, now where do I go? Probably have to drive at least an hour. Going to spend other money while you're doing it because you can't just go do one thing anymore. You got to stop at a gas station. Got to get coffee. Got to do other things. And I've got to also, while I'm doing this, I've also got to position my phone so that I can capture it, so that I can let people know that I'm into magnet fishing, because it's not like a real hobby unless you televise it, apparently. That's how you know you're serious. You get video.
Well, and that's like, you can't do hobbies without monetizing them, or else society makes you feel bad. And I think that's another issue.
Well, yeah, you're not serious enough about your hobby unless you're monetizing it and making videos or selling it.
It's unfortunate.
And if all we have is this kind of like beacon of light that says monetize, why would anybody be interested in doing any kind of pursuit that doesn't monetize? Like research. Why would anyone want to do research if you can't monetize it? A lot of research is behind closed doors with NDAs, and you can't video that crap. Not if you want to work in that field for long. But even then, like, what's our society isn't incentivizing doing anything for the sake of doing it at that point. how can we expect anyone to be interested in anything but shopping when that's all they see? Let's see, Google News. Show me something that's not an advertisement for something.
Well, and that's where I don't. Also, I was going to say originally, I don't think Google intended for their platform just to be a big advertisement. I do think originally that they wanted it to be a search engine, but over the course of time, it just became a big advertisement platform.
Well, I think what happened is that Google itself became Google Scholar, and then they supplanted it with what we call Google Now, which is different.
Right. Yeah.
Because there was a time when Google returned information and wasn't trying to sell me everything. And when I need information, I just go to Google Scholar. So I've been kind of interested in VR systems lately. Just because there was the Apple, whatever they call it, the Apple goggles thing, and then Meta has recently released their latest Quest headset. These things keep getting smaller and more feature packed and can do cooler stuff. But then it got me thinking, like, well, what about like things like the what was the Oculus Rift or the Rift S, the before Meta got them, because those were premium devices at one point, and it looks like you can get into like a Rift S for like $100.
It's not bad.
No, it's not. And I read some things like, they complain because new systems have better resolution or better frame rates, and it suffers things like screen door effect. But then when I read reviews of people playing games and actually using the thing, not just like looking for flaws, they say they don't notice that stuff because they're too busy playing the game. And then it got me thinking, like, I wonder, is this like the VR equivalent to or VR user equivalent to the audiophile, where they're really just into what it looks like and how it feels, and they're not really playing games to the point where they forget that they're wearing a headset? Or is it just incapable? And I refuse to believe that it's incapable, because there are plenty of like videos of people playing flying games like Project Wingman or DCS World, where they are not worried about screen door effect. They're not thinking about the frame rate. They're worried about whatever game they're playing in that moment.
I think that's the optimal experience when you're immersed, but immersion is like the goal and not necessarily inherent in the gaming experience. And it's like,
yeah,
the controls can break immersion, the graphics can break immersion, screen tearing can break immersion. It's not always the same things that can break it, which conversely, it's not always the same things that can cause it either. It's like people can play Quake on the lowest graphics settings and be completely immersed.
Yeah, so it really is like the equivalent to the audiophile that listens to the noise of their system. I can't trust a review like that when someone's too invested in like an aspect that's essentially irrelevant to me, and they're focusing on something like that. That's problematic. There are a lot of reviews of hardware, like older hardware, where when compared to the new stuff is just, the cat's meow. And they complain about things that you shouldn't notice if you're actually using them. the limited experiences that I've had with VR, like they've only gotten better, of course, over time. Like the quality of what I'm looking at, the quality of sound, the way the headsets feel, the way they're weight balanced, the way they sit on your face. All of these things have improved, but I don't think at any point I thought like, man, that screen door effect is really messing up my gameplay. I think it was almost always like, whoa, how do I adapt to this new environment? This is really crazy. I might not be ready for this. Or maybe the technology wasn't there yet. But the stuff that I've watched, like when I watch somebody playing a flying game and they indicate that they're using like some kind of VR headset, and you can tell like in a flying game when somebody's using VR because they're able to see more of their environment. They're able to make decisions that are beyond what's just in the display. And I don't think I have a hard time imagining that they're sitting there engaged in whatever they're doing, worried about pixel density. Even like, I mean, I get it. Like we want higher frame rates because it looks better, but I mean, if it's not tearing in a way that interferes with immersion and it's only noticeable to somebody who's not playing, is that actually a big deal?
I mean, I think by definition, no, but
but yeah, it is. It still is.
But that's where like those people who make it a big deal, I think push the technology to the edge because it's like you posted a video of a super high resolution
that flight was amazing.
Simulator where it's like the person who cares about that makes everybody else's simulators able to, like, them pushing the envelope is going to have a trickle down effect of everybody else having a better experience because that person is trying to see what the most that experience can be. And so it's not that everybody has to have that same experience. It's that as long as that person exists, I do think it allows people to enter at whatever level they want and then experience it at whatever level they want. Whereas if there's no person experience it at that highest level, it can then result in restrictions on where other people want to enter,
or complacency with the technology. Because I'd be really miffed if the best we got was like the equivalent of putting a phone inside of a cardboard cutout. But that's not the case. The technology is incredible now. I watched a video demonstration of VR headsets that were basically the size of swimming goggles, like the kinds that Olympians wear when they jump in that pool and go freestyle for whatever, a minute, 30 seconds. But the size of, heavy sunglasses, just goggles, really, like they don't look intrusive anymore. They're small enough that they can be worn without having to have a giant counterweight on the back. And obviously those things are really expensive, like thousands of dollars. And so not everyone's going to be able to jump into that. Not everyone's going to be able to jump into the Apple ski mask. I don't even know what it's called. Vision, of course. Apple Vision. The Apple ski mask is like, prohibitively expensive.
Yeah, the first one's like $3,500, which, yeah.
For $3,500, you can get the absolute most advanced non-Apple VR system that will work with almost anything. Not just Apple's. And why do they have this stupid scrolling crap? Why can't I just click on things? I will admit that their version of what this stuff looks like is very pretty. Apple does a great job of making things look really good. Oh, but that headband is hideous.
Well, and I've seen the reviews of, people saying like when they're trying to wear it for extended periods of time, they can definitely feel it. It's not um it's not the equivalent of sitting in front of a computer screen for the same amount of time. And I think you know, that's going to have to change if it's going to be widely adopted, but I don't know if it's possible to make something that's like, I mean, I'm sure eventually, but I don't know how close we are to making something as lightweight as it needs to actually be at the cost it needs to be for it to become ubiquitous.
Yeah, $3,500 for the base model, almost $4,000 for the largest storage capacity version. God. Oh, yeah, you got to scan your face with your phone, your iPhone, before you can even get started. Great. I mean, I guess that's kind of cool. They want to scan your face so that they make sure that they got the face cup properly designed. Better have something like that for $3,500, though. I mean, that right there is a really serious gaming computer with a really serious VR headset. And peripherals.
Yeah, which again, it's like,
or just Apple Vision, the entry level Apple Vision. You could have a barnstorming, like, holy crap, bad mamma jamma gaming machine, and a really like $1,000 VR headset, and all of the other stuff. Probably still have money for games too.
Imagine paying $3,500 for a piece of machinery that didn't allow you to look at something. Because, like, not to say that everybody needs to look at VR porn, but the idea of somebody paying that much for something and then Apple being like, no, I know you're an adult, but we're not going to allow you to look at any pornography on this thing.
Wait, is that seriously?
I mean, unless it's like, there's probably like a Apple. I doubt they have a VR porn approved.
Nope, you can't watch porn.
Yeah.
No VR porn on Apple Vision Pro. Oh, no. It's the New York Post calls it a $3,500 chastity belt.
Yeah, because that's where I'm like, again, that's definitely not the only reason to have a machine, but to pay that much for a machine and then be like, you can't do this thing. Like, to be restricted at all in any way is wild, let alone like to be restricted from something that's like no kid's gonna be able to afford a fucking Vision Pro. So like the idea that you need to make it so that it's okay for children to use is like, what are we doing? What's this audience that has $3,500 for this machine that they're gonna let their kid use? Fuck out of here. No. Because then part of it, there's no way to make the Vision Pro fit a kid's head and an adult's head at the same time. Like, that's definitely a different.
So for $3,500, a person, if they were into this sort of thing, could buy a luxury silicone cast sex doll that looks like a porn, a CGI porn star kind of thing. You can buy two of those because they're only like $1,500. Oh, these are creepy. I mean, they look like humans with vacant faces. They have names. That's even weirder. Let's see. Tanya 2.0. Save $1,000 immediately. That means that they want your money. Oh, here's one for $10,000. So this is a really serious one. So you have to buy like 3 Vision Pros to get one of these things. But the other ones were like, $1,500, $1,700. They could buy a really high-end normal VR headset and a silicone sex doll for the price of a VR Pro. Probably have way more fun. Because, no porn on Apple. Is Apple Vision going to let people play games that where people get killed?
Maybe, maybe not, actually. Because then that's another issue is like they're not going to have the same access to VR gaming as somebody who's not using a Vision Pro. So it's like, good luck. Like, is Vision Pro going to support Steam VR? Probably not. Let me look.
5
is
VR.
not compatible with Steam VR, which is the largest library of games in VR.
It's
So
the
it's
largest liar. Yeah. They don't want access to Steam.
No, because they can't control Steam. So it's like you probably can't download a Steam game on a regular Apple computer. I
I know
haven't.
you can. I think you can.
Oh, can you?
Yeah. There's still. I think there's.
Oh, you know what? You're right. They have the option. They have to have the build, but it's like
Yeah.
I've seen it in there. So
Yeah. It's just, but it's like only certain games are even Apple compatible, like because it's its own freaking operating system. It has its own rules, and it's not Linux. Close, similar, but not. Nearly 30,000 games. Oh, that's the whole library, not just Apple.
there's. Oh wait.
See, I'm actually convinced that we're gonna see essentially a Valve Index and Steam Deck that are able to work with each other to the point where the Steam Deck will become good enough that it can support VR, where people will just be able to tuck that in their backpack and play VR in open area places. Like, I remember you said that you participated and got to experience that kind of thing, like a really serious immersion level simulated environment. But with something like a Steam Deck, where it's smaller than a laptop, it's just a juicy tablet, a really thick tablet. Like, I think that's where it's really headed. I don't think that. I think it's nice that Meta wants to have it all in the headset, and Apple wants to have it all in the headset. That's really kind of quaint, but not for actually simulating anything more than just some simple textures, like stuff that still looks like video games. The most profoundly inspiring VR stuff that I've seen is doing everything that it can to simulate the reality. It puts us in the uncanny valley, like that airplane flight video. That stuff at times, I swear it looked like actually looking out the window of an airplane. It looked real. And of course, the guy had like a dozen mods to his system that were all fine tuned. And I think you're right. I think he had to have been running some mod that was like taking Google Earth data and then re-rendering it and then rasterizing it onto the surfaces that it had already calculated. Like it had to have been doing some like really crazy stuff, because there were too many textures that were just when he would move closer, like the seat texture, the fabric on the seats, that stuff got closer, it just became more fabric-like on the screen. I bet that guy has a really sick, nasty computer, though. Like, just the kind of thing that just you look at, it's like, whoa.
Yeah, it was definitely a 3090 at least. I remember that.
Oh, yeah, because, like, there were only a few times where I would see something generate, and it was almost always, like, because there was a cloud overhead, and it was now generating a shadow that it was casting. And it was always off, like at the edge of the visible range in the screen, like only the absolute edge of vision, like was that stuff happening. And so, I'm pretty sure that also happens with normal digital cameras on an airplane when you're looking at the edge of the horizon. They run out of bit depth. The camera itself, the chip and the lens can no longer resolve at that detail, at that distance. Like all of these things are pretty. I guess that's why like I just it seems like a cash grab almost to like try and stuff it all in just the headset, because I'm not seeing the kind of computing power in ARM architecture to deliver the kind of realism that should be like the gold standard for VR. If you want to do VR, the goal should be to make it real, I think. Otherwise, it's just a video game with a heavy interface. And I don't mean like what was that terrible Bruce Willis Surrogates? Bruce Willis made that movie where everyone just operates a remote Android with their VR system. I don't mean like that. And I definitely don't want a Ready Player One scenario to emerge.
So I'm looking at the list of the things that they added to Flight Simulator in this FS Realistic Pro to make it more realistic.
Yeah.
And some of the things are obvious, like turbulence and engine vibrations, but some of the things aren't obvious, like sneezing in the toilet flush or crash screaming. So it's like, I do appreciate, this is the type of thing that I think when we think of immersion, it's these little details that increase immersion that aren't necessarily just like visual fidelity, because it's like, oh, if I create a picture perfect image of something that is smooth, then obviously it's going to be immersive on that level. But is it going to make sounds if I walk around? Is it going to make it seem like I'm walking indoors? Is it going to make it seem like I'm walking outdoors? Are those things congruous? And so there's all these things about like,
yeah, like a marble surface. If that shit doesn't squeak when we walk over it, then we know it's not actually made of marble, because marble just makes that noise.
Yeah, so there's all these things. And then on top of that, is the marble floor in a small room or is it in a big room? Because we know there's a difference in how your footsteps are going to sound depending on the size of the room. So it's like all these things that go into the sound and visual design to increase immersion that can combine to be executed in an immersive experience. But I think people take these things for granted, which is why I think AAA studios and companies that get into gaming thinking they can make these experiences don't understand immersion, and they don't understand what makes immersive experiences. And that's why I think a lot of them are failing.
Yeah. Yeah, every footstep can't sound like gravel. Running on dirt shouldn't sound like gravel.
Running shouldn't sound like walking.
Running shouldn't sound like walking. Walking shouldn't
it sounds obvious.
Walking shouldn't sound like we're wearing high heels all the time either.
And it's like these things seem so obvious, but I think that's where like the games that have executed, or not even necessarily games, the media that have executed it well uh don't stand out almost, because then it's like there's there's a level of sweetening that has to happen with almost all media. And when I say sweetening, I mean adding the audio to make it into its final form for like production readiness for like broadcast or wherever it's going to be. And it's like if you go look at a lot of studio TV shows in the 80s and in the early 90s especially, a lot of the sweetening is like re-recording audio, and the voiceovers look terrible now, but when we were younger we probably just knew something was off but didn't know why it was off. And it's like, oh, when they did the sweetening they recorded the voice in a different room than the person on video is looking like they're in, so that's why it sounds off or something like that. And like all these elements of the sound design for older media didn't have to do as much to be as immersive as it does today, for better or for worse. And I think that's where it's like if you go back and look at that stuff now, it really stands out because we've gotten better at picking those things out because we've been exposed to them over the years as the audience. But it's like it's not because the previous stuff was really awesome. It's like, if anything, it's because our brains just hadn't had enough exposure to really good sound design, so our brains would let bad sound design slide.
Yeah, like I've seen some movies with incredible sound design that like mostly dialogue driven stuff where they have city sounds and it's the stuff in the background that like the wind even that sounds that makes it come together, that makes it seem like the image itself is alive. Because I've seen plenty of art films where it's clearly a real scene, because a lot of art films are very low budget, but they run with silence and some pure ADR where, yeah, obviously they were speaking into a microphone into a completely controlled environment, and it doesn't seem real. It seems like it's all in someone's head. And then, of course, these are like decisions. These are production decisions, and in the way to tell the story or the way to communicate whatever is being communicated. And I get that part, but there's a like Lord of the Rings. I like that movie a lot because there's a lot of just fantasy noises. Like the Balrog is this insane creature of fire, and then like the shrieks that those flying snake things made. Like that's none of that stuff has like a real world corollary that I can identify. But then when I read the how they made it interviews, and the guy talks about dragging a microphone across pavement or recording the sound of his children screaming and then pitching it up. Oh, it all makes sense now. But there are things that they do that just bring those sounds to life. That's really, that in itself is like something that I really appreciate. Really, really good sound design, really good Foley work. Like when the post-production really comes together at the end, that's the stuff that I really appreciate the most. Because you don't think about it. It's like a cake without vanilla extract in it. Like it might be okay, but you know it's missing something. Can't quite tell what it is all the time. You might know exactly what it's missing right away. I think you're right. I think if people aren't aware that they should even care about these things, then they wouldn't care about them at all, and then those secrets of the universe would be lost, essentially.
You there?
Yeah.
Okay, like cut out real quick. And yeah, I think it's hard to know when somebody's being ridiculous or when they're doing something at the cutting edge that needs to be done just to do it. Like increasingly, I think that's harder for people to know, which is where it's like, I'm sure when that guy was building his flight simulating or the machine to run flight simulator, it was like he definitely had a goal in mind where that level of realism, when he attained it, it was like, goal achieved. But all the time along the way, along the build, it's probably like, is this going to be worth it? Is this going to be, $5,000, $6,000, whatever the machine cost, and then the time to put it together? Is this actually going to be worth the endeavor? And I'm sure, like,
so
the entire time he's probably like, I don't know.
Yeah, I know that someday I will have a flight simulator set up, like just like a dedicated. You sit down and there's the yoke, or there's the throttle and stick combination, or I'll have some kind of setup like that. Probably the HOTAS, because I've been playing Ace Combat now for close to 2 decades, and I seek out other flying games just to try them because I like them. There's something about this. So I know that I'm going to have one of those at some point. So I can definitely relate to is this going to be, or no, I'm going to do this, but is this going to be worth it part? Like, I remember playing Flight Simulator when it was still all wires, and it was so hard, but I didn't stop then. I think that the person that creates that has that goal in mind, they're like never going to give up until they have their own, because I've also come to accept that I'm probably not going to get a pilot's license. And if I do, I'm probably not going to be able to fly like military grade aircraft. It's probably just, that's a high probability of certainty in that statement right there. But I can definitely pretend to fly one. And I know that there are simulators out there that go to great lengths to make it as realistic as possible. Like DCS World, I watched a tutorial on how to get started with an F-18. And the guy's, one of the first things he said is, yeah, you're not going to get this thing off the air the first time or the second time. And that's part of the challenge, I think, is that as the simulators become more realistic and they have more interactivity and they're more immersive and they encourage the person to actually learn like the plane that they're flying, it becomes more rewarding at that scale. And so the investment in time itself is, it's almost irrelevant. It's like, it doesn't matter because I'm going to learn how to fly this plane, and I'm going to put the time into developing the simulator so that the only thing that I'm missing is like the G-force and getting riddled with bullets, basically. But I don't think that the person who sets out to build their flight simulator setup, I don't think they're worried about like, is this going to be worth it? Unless they're just not actually into it. Like, it's just like they're like, oh, this looks cool, I want one of those, but they don't actually want to spend the time. I mean, you've spent like countless hours flying in Flight Simulator. It's not easy, is it?
No.
Yeah, I mean, like, you have to learn every aircraft, like, from the ground up every time you get it. I mean, I'm sure there's some level of familiarity between aircrafts, and once you learn one, it becomes easier to learn the next, but you still have to learn the ins and outs of them. You got the ornithopter, right? Is that thing like flying a plane or a helicopter, or is it completely its own thing?
It's completely its own thing, but on that note, like, what I have also noticed is a civilian prop plane is going to be completely different than an airliner. It's going to be completely different than an F-16.
Oh, yeah.
Completely different than a helicopter. And like you're saying, there's this learning curve on each individual aircraft that the precursor to that is just learning how to fly, like the physics of flying, period.
Yeah.
And that's why airliner pilots put in 1,000 hours on a simulator before they get behind a regular, like a real aircraft, like the real air, like commercial airliner. So it's like real pilots don't just jump into commercial airliners either. So
yeah, hey noob, here's the keys to this multi-million-dollar machine. Go at it.
Yeah. And
Don't
the same
crash.
shit with military pilots. It's like they're gonna be getting in a simulator for who knows how many hours before they ever actually get behind the yoke of the actual plane that they're training to fly. And it's
then they have to have like 500 hours of actual flight time in that seat before they're like certified to actually go on sorties, which is also crazy. They have to get a license. They've got to get certified for the plane. They've got to go through the simulator training. Then they got to go through the real world training. And if they make it through all that, then they might get to fly it on an actual mission.
Well, and
it makes sense. That stuff's not cheap, and they don't need to be making mistakes. They can't put anyone up there who makes mistakes. I get that. I get it.
And it's like, you know, that line of progression is pretty well maintained, so that it's like you don't really get somebody who's going to get behind a flight stick of a helicopter, a commercial airliner, or anything, even like just a prop plane, and not have had hundreds of hours of training to get them to that point. And it's like,
just for like single engine,
or even drones. Like I know I think it was like 15 hours of flight or something before I could fly above 1,500 feet. It's like once I hit a certain number of hours, then my drone unlocked and was like, oh, now I can go past 1,500 and go to 3,000 feet. And it's like, knowing that those types of checks are in place, even that if someone's flying a drone under a different person's license, they can get in trouble for that. Like, say I start up my drone and then you take over. If you don't have the proper license and you fly in airspace that you're not licensed to fly in, we could both get in trouble for that. In a way where now I wouldn't doubt that people who do that shit actually get in trouble. Whereas like 15 years ago, you passed the remote or past the RC, nobody's going to fucking care. And it's like, we're not in the same world 15 years ago, to the point that I can understand. I guess it's more like 24 years ago. The restrictions that we have now on like flight training and all that, I know they were starting to be in place. They definitely weren't as strict as they are now. And we're in like a really good place, I think.
It looks like it takes 3 months from zero time to get a pilot's license, and it takes 40 hours just for a private pilot's license. But to be certified for a commercial flight, 250 hours, and to actually get a transport pilot certificate to transport people takes 1,500 additional hours. This isn't something that people just do, and assuming that's like a 9-month course essentially, and that's like going to school every day, like going to school every day.
And any of those hours are going to be spent like with somebody, and it's like you're going to be apprenticing, so it's like you're never going to be flying a plane by yourself in those 1,500 hours.
Yeah, that's a good thing. We don't want people up in the air that don't know what they're doing. That's like the most terrifying shit imaginable. That's why flying cars won't happen.
Exactly.
God, 1,500 hours to get a license to drive a flying car. That's not enough.
Exceptional Radio.
Exceptional Randos shows produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Well, that